Hey, wake up. It's Means Morning News. Just after 11 a.m. on the East Coast, I'm that newsman, Sam Sachs, and this is the only time of the day I'm not wearing a tracksuit. A new report from Oxfam and Human Rights Watch finds that the assurances Israel provided that it is not violating human rights aren't worth the paper they were typed on. Shocking, I know. In order to comply with U.S. international law on arms exports, the Israeli government provided written assurances last week that it will not block U.S.-provided humanitarian aid to Gaza and that it will use U.S.-provided weapons in compliance with international law. The assurances were signed by Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. He's the guy who previously compared Palestinians to animals. Now, according to this new Human Rights Watch report, those assurances are not credible. It noted that Gaza is on the verge of a famine, and it cited specific examples of the Israeli military breaking international law, including white phosphorus military operations used in Lebanon and Gaza, indiscriminate and disproportionate attacks on hospitals and ambulances, systemic blocking of food aid into Gaza, and the bombardment and destruction of critical infrastructure like water systems. Under U.S. law, weapons shipments to countries found to be violating human rights are supposed to be suspended. And just like a group of Democratic senators urged the White House last week, the groups urged Biden to comply. Quote, Oxfam and Human Rights Watch believe a suspension of arms transfers to Israel is necessary so long as there is an overriding risk that they are being used to commit or facilitate serious violations of international humanitarian and human rights law, and U.S. law and policy. So far, the Biden administration is not willing to take that step. In related news, the guy who was previously the point person for the United States on Israel and Gaza during the last presidential administration wants everyone to know he still has ideas. Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, gave an interview earlier this month to Harvard University where he was asked about the war on Gaza, and he endorsed ethnic cleansing and urged the Israelis to finish the job. Take a look.
So what I would do right now if I was Israel is I would try to say, number one, you want to get as many civilians out of Rafah as possible. I think that you want to try to clear that out. I know that with diplomacy, maybe you get them into Egypt. I know that that's been refused, but with the right diplomacy, I think it would be possible. But in addition to that, the thing that I would try to do if I was Israel right now is I would just bulldoze something in the Negev. I would try to move people in there. I know that won't be the popular thing to do, but I think that that's a better option to do so that you can go in and finish the job.
So a mass displacement of people into the desert so that Israel can, quote, finish the job. Here was Kushner when asked about the concern that Palestinians, once forced out of Gaza, won't be allowed to return to their homes.
There are real fears on the part of Arabs, and I'm sure you talk to a lot of them, who think once Gazans leave Gaza, Netanyahu's never going to let them back in.
Maybe, but I'm not sure there's much left of Gaza at this point. So,
yeah, not much left there, except for all the valuable beachfront property Kushner touted later in the interview. Kushner went on to admit he's not directly involved in dialogue with the Israelis, and that these are just things he's thinking about while lounging around Miami Beach. A Trump win in November, however, could put Kushner back in a position to enact his ethnic cleansing fantasies. Meanwhile, north of the U.S. border, Canadian lawmakers don't want blood on their hands anymore. Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly announced Tuesday the Canadian government would halt all future arms sales to Israel. The decision follows the passage of a motion in Parliament on Monday that called for a stop to weapons exports to the Israeli military. A prior version of that motion also called on the Canadian government to recognize the state of Palestine and to sanction Israel, but that language was stripped out before final passage. The group Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East criticized how the measure was watered down, The Guardian reported, but still called it a, quote, small step forward for ending Canadian complicity in Israel's genocidal war in Gaza. It is a step forward indeed, and one that should make the poutine taste a little better now. The U.S. Supreme Court signed off on Texas Governor Greg Abbott's usurpation of federal power at the southern border, at least temporarily. The conservative majority of justices rejected a motion by the Biden administration to put a hold on a new law in Texas known as SB 4 that allows state authorities to arrest and deport people suspected of being in the country without proper documentation. Immigration enforcement has long been established to be in the purview of the federal government, not states, so SB 4 is unconstitutional. A district court in Texas also ruled that it was likely unconstitutional and put a hold on the law. Then an appeals court agreed to take up the case, but bizarrely allowed the law to go into effect, breaking with normal procedure on how these issues are adjudicated. And on Tuesday, the Supreme Court also signed off on allowing the Texas law to go into effect. Liberal Justice Sonia Sotomayor wrote in dissent, quote, "The court confronts a state immigration law that will transform the balance of power at the border and have life-altering consequences for non-citizens in Texas." She said that the majority on the court invited further chaos and crisis into the immigration system by allowing this law to go into effect. Quote, "Texas can now immediately enforce its own law imposing criminal liability on thousands of non-citizens and requiring their removal to Mexico. This law will disrupt sensitive foreign relations, frustrate the protection of individuals fleeing persecution, hamper active federal enforcement efforts, undermine federal agencies' ability to detect and monitor imminent security threats, and deter non-citizens from reporting abuse or trafficking." Now, after the Supreme Court ruling came down, an appeals court in Texas again put the law back on hold Tuesday night. That is, until the court can rule on its constitutionality. Senate Republicans defended the Supreme Court's decision on Tuesday and admitted in a tweet that immigration enforcement is a power vested in the federal government, not states, but the Texas law is still necessary because the president won't enforce laws at the border. In reality, the number of people being deported has dramatically increased under President Biden, with more than 1 million deported each year of his presidency. Starbucks appears to be following through on its promise to negotiate a collective bargaining agreement with its unionized stores, putting an end to years of obstruction under former CEO Howard Schultz. Company and Workers United, which has organized 10,000 employees across more than 400 cafes, agreed to open labor contract negotiations in April. And instead of bargaining on a cafe-to-cafe basis, the company agreed to negotiate in person with representatives from all unionized stores to establish a framework for an agreement. The union has laid out a number of demands it will seek out during those negotiations, including a starting base pay of $20 per hour, plus annual cost of living increases, protections against unjust firing and discipline, no reductions in wages or hours, high-quality employer-paid health care, and zero tolerance for harassment and bigotry from customers and management. By the time negotiations get underway next month, there's likely to be even more unionized baristas in the room because the organizing wave isn't slowing down. On Tuesday, Starbucks Workers United announced that 9 more stores had unionized in the states of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Illinois, Maryland, Wyoming, and Ohio. It's been a joy watching this scrappy union bring a powerful corporate entity to its knees. Well done, everyone. 2023 was a record-breaking year for the planet, but not in a good way. The World Meteorological Organization released a report on a number of climate change indicators that have now reached levels never measured before. First, 2023 was the hottest year ever on record. The global average temperature hovered 1.45 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial average, right near the threshold established by the Paris Climate Agreement that nations committed to avoiding 1.5 degrees Celsius increase. The WMO did note that El Niño conditions contributed to the rapid rise in temperatures last year, but also that, quote, some areas of unusual warming, such as the Northeast Atlantic, do not correspond to typical patterns of warming associated with El Nino. No, instead, it's all the greenhouse gases trapping heat. The report found that concentrations of carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide also hit a record high in 2023, now 50% above the pre-industrial era. Last year saw ocean heat content reach a record level, resulting in increased ocean acidification and damage to marine ecosystems. On that issue in particular, the forecast is gloomy. The report stated, quote, "It is expected that warming will continue, a change which is irreversible on scales of hundreds to thousands of years." Yikes. Another record, the global mean sea level hit its highest point since satellites started tracking it. The agency noted that the rate of increase over the last 10 years was double the rate of increase in the first 10 years of study back in the 1990s. Then there's the planet's cryosphere, or ice caps. The level of Antarctic sea ice hit a record low, with about 1 million square miles below the previous record. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres reacted to the report, saying, quote, "Sirens are blaring across all major indicators. Some records aren't just chart topping, they're chart busting, and changes are speeding up." That means 2024 is set to be another record-breaking year, and it will need to be if we're going to reverse runaway global warming. We need to see a record number of fossil fuel extraction sites capped and dismantled, a record number of dirty pipelines sabotaged and shut down, and a record number of fossil fuel industry executives' yachts sunk. Okay, that last one won't really solve climate change. It's just a morale booster for the movement. All right, friends, the show ends this morning with a sunrise from New Hampshire. It was sent in by Andrew from Stairs Mountain. Enjoy. Thank you, Andrew. Show's over. Thanks for watching, and thanks to the team behind the scenes. Please sign up for Means TV if you haven't yet, and subscribe to our YouTube and podcast channels, and follow us on social media. One day capitalism will fall. Until then, we're going to be right here. See you tomorrow.